This leads us on to talking about string properties and indexes. Now, a property is something that exists on a particular object that we can reference. So for example, up here we've been staring at this for most of the duration of the course as it just generates our nice background. But we haven't really talked about what inner HTML actually is. So if we hover over it, you can see that it says it's a property. So if you're new to JavaScript, new to properties or programming in general, a property is just something that exists on a particular object elsewhere, and we can go ahead and reference it. Now, a function on an object, yes, it is a property in a sense, but we tend to call them methods. So a function we know we can call something like this, but because it's also on an object, it's known as a method, as you can see here. So the reason I'm telling you this is because in the last video, we looked at something like this, where we did a new string. Then over here in the browser, we then looked at these length properties, and I called them a property. We also have 0 as a property and 1 as a property. So why do we have half of each string on property 0 and 1? Now, it becomes more apparent if I add some 9s to it. So we end up with a number 5599, and if we expand this, we see 5599. So why might we want to do this? Now, we don't want to use new string out in the wild, but this actually gives us something visual to learn from, and this is why we are going through all of these main constructs of the JavaScript language. Now, if we wanted to access a property called length, what we can do is just simply go ahead and say .length. This is then going to give us 4, as we have 4 items in our string. Now, don't get confused, this is obviously a number, and we'll move things over to a string literal as we continue, but this obviously gives us a nice visual reference over here in the DevTools console. Now, the reason I am telling you this is because if we have a normal string, a string literal, which we do favor when it comes to JavaScript, we can save this out. Now, in the browser, we don't actually really see anything. We just see the word pepperoni. But because our string literals are being created from these string objects, all of this still exists under the hood, which means that we can go ahead and say, give me the length of this string. And you can see that we now have 9. Now, to make things a little bit clearer, what we'll do is move this onto its own console log. So we'll have console log property pepperoni.length. So that acts as our first property that we want to actually ask for. Now you may be thinking, why are we trying to access the length of a string? There could be many reasons. We might want to check if someone has entered perhaps a credit card number, and if that credit card number is too long, we can then check that via the length property. We can also do interesting things such as finding the last character in the string. But to find the last character in the string, we need to work out how to access the first character in the string. So if I say pepperoni, much like a .length, we can also access this property, and this is called dot notation. We can also access this property using a square bracket notation like this. Now, when it comes to using square bracket notation, we need to actually put whatever it is we're accessing as a string. Now, when I save these, they give us exactly the same thing. So this is really interesting, and we know that we can look up properties with this square bracket notation. But instead of a length, which seems kind of pointless because we can easily do .length and it becomes nice and readable, we also get nice auto-completion. But if we delete our string inside the square brackets altogether and put the 0, this will actually go and look up this 0 property here. So this is essentially using a 0 to go and look up that first property. Now we can either pass in a number or we can pass in a string. It doesn't matter in this case. So when I save it, even if we do pass in a number, such as 0, that is going to be converted from a number to a string, and then it's going to give us back that first property. Now, what I like to do when accessing square bracket 0, the first item, so that gives us this P, I actually prefer, and many developers prefer, keeping a numeric value because it becomes very easy to read. You can see it's bright pink in our code. You know it's a number. You know it's going to be looking up a index. Now you may be thinking, why does the first item in the string begin with 0? Surely it should be a number 1. Now, JavaScript and other languages often use what we call a zero-based index. So that means, quite confusingly, if we want to access the second item, the E, we have to use square bracket 1. So you can see as we continue, we can do square bracket 2. Now, if we wanted to access the last item in a string, what we could in fact do is break this out into a variable. So we could say this is the pizza, and above we'll say const pizza equals pepperoni. So this will give us square bracket 0. Nothing's going to change at this point in time. However, we can now access the pizza.length property, so we don't have to keep typing out our string every single time. Now, if we take this length property and actually put it inside of here, it's going to give us undefined. So this is quite interesting again because the indexes are zero-based. So let's go ahead and log out the length of this. Now the length is 9, but that means that there should be 9 items in the position. But because it's a zero-based index, 9 won't exist because we've learned 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 9 is a character that does not exist. So what we could do is in fact -1, which gives us 8. So here we could say pizza square bracket pizza.length -1, and then we get the character of I. So if you want to access the first item in the string, we could use a square bracket 0. There is also another way that we could do this. We could say char at and then 0, but the square bracket 0 is a much more convenient way of doing things, and it's a little bit more readable. It doesn't feel like I'm doing anything fancy by calling and having to understand a method on the string object. Now, one thing that is also quite interesting is that spaces also count as a length property. So here, if we go ahead and log out pizza.length, we're going to see 17. So just keep that in mind and take it into consideration that spaces and any other valid string character will go into that length, and it all contributes to the length of the string. So in this video, we'll just do a quick roundup. We have learned about this .length property. We've learned how to access particular values. We've learned that we should, when we use a square bracket to look up a property name, we should use strings. However, it's appropriate to just stick with numbers when we want to look up an index. It could be something like 0, 1, 2. And we've also learned that because it's a square bracket, we need to pass in a string. And even if we pass in a number, JavaScript will convert that to a string for us. We can make it easier for ourselves in terms of readability by just sticking with numbers. If we want to access the last item in the string, then we can do pizza.length and then we can -1. Now this is a common pattern you'll see elsewhere in this course as well when we deal with things such as JavaScript arrays. So that's it for this video, and I will see you in the next video where we're going to learn how to correctly type check strings as well.